95% of the people hunting with muzzleloaders are not using a firearm that has anything to do with days gone by. Right? They're using a modern, rifled, long-range weapon with a scope. Hey, it's Greg here with Outdoors on the Cheap, and today I'm going to talk about why I think, single-shot shotguns, break-action shotguns, should be allowed during muzzleloader season. So let me just back up a little bit. I mean, every place is different. I live in Nova Scotia, Canada, and we've got different seasons here. We've got sort of bow-only season that starts September 12th, runs to December 10th. And then there's a muzzleloader and crossbow season, which starts September 26th and runs to December 3rd. And then what's called general open season starts October 28th and runs to December 3rd. Okay, so for about a 2-week period in September, you can only use a bow and arrow, regardless of how sophisticated that is, modern or primitive. And then from pretty much the end of September to the end of October, you can only use a muzzle loader, right? Or a flintlock, or, various sort of traditional weapons like that. And then from October 28th onward, you can use anything you want. Not anything you want, but basically you can use rifles, you can use shotguns, you can use all that sort of stuff. And the twist is that if you're using a bow or a muzzle loader right up until September 26th, if you take a deer with that firearm, as soon as October 28th rolls around, you can take a second deer using a shotgun or a rifle. So if you can shoot a deer with a bow or a crossbow or a muzzle loader before October 28th, you can get a second deer. So number one, I find that a little bit, I don't understand the conservation mentality in that. Basically, if I buy a second firearm, if I spend money on a bow or a crossbow or a muzzle loader, I can kill 2 deer. Right? If I only spend money on one firearm, I can only kill 1 deer. I don't really understand the reasoning behind that in and of itself. But anyway, for me, and again, this is Outdoors on the Cheap, and I'm really thinking about the younger person, the new hunter, or just anyone who's on hard times, doesn't have a lot of money. I mean, a lot of people think of hunting deer as a way to put some meat in the freezer, maybe save a few bucks. If you got to drop $500 on a muzzle loader or crossbow, you're really not saving money on meat. Your money would be better spent just buying ham or pork or something like that that's low cost, right? If that's about money, right? And savings and putting meat in the fridge and that sort of thing. So for me, I always like to think about, when I was in my 20s and that sort of thing, and just having one firearm to do everything, right? And a single shot 12 gauge is sort of like the ideal firearm for that sort of thing. Right, they're inexpensive. You can buy these brand new for like $150 or more, right? And you can buy them used for less. And you can put just about any kind of ammunition in them. You can even get like reducer things where you can put 20 gauge ammo in a 12 gauge. Sometimes 20 gauge ammo is cheaper. So you can use it for hunting small game. You can use it for, hunting a range of different things. And when you got a slug in one of these, you can definitely take a deer with it. Or buckshot at the right range, right? That's another topic, don't want to get into that, but right, the versatility of a 12 gauge, or, a 16 gauge, or maybe even a 20 gauge. With a 20 gauge, you gotta be much more conscious of range and that sort of thing. Again, that's another topic. Let's just keep it about the 12 gauge for now, okay? And then we'll get into the idea of a 20 gauge as we go along here. So my argument is that I think it should be allowed to have these during that muzzle loader season, okay? Because these have been around for a long time, and sure, things like muzzle loaders, flintlocks, and muskets have been around since like the 1600s, okay? But that's not exactly what people are using during muzzle loader season. They're not using. There are some people using really old-fashioned firearms, but most of them are using modern muzzle loaders they buy at Cabela's, okay? So, the idea that you're doing something old during that season doesn't make a lot of sense. So when I talk about this with other people, when I hear arguments about why you should or should not be able to use a single shot shotgun during muzzleloader season, there's really three arguments I tend to hear. One, this is a primitive, this is the season for primitive weapons. It's a primitive hunt, that sort of thing. The other is that it's about heritage and tradition and, sort of doing what the forefathers did and, connecting with that sort of thing, the nostalgia and all that sort of stuff. And the other is, promoting ethics, in terms of shot placement and that sort of thing. So let me speak to all of those. Let me knock these off one by one, okay? So the first one is, the idea that it's a muzzleloader season. And I'm not going to talk about bow season. I think maybe the bow hunters should have a couple weeks ahead of everyone else to get a crack at things, because they have to get close, right? And, once everybody's out with their rifles just blasting away, the deer do get pretty cagey. So sure, I'll give the bow hunters, 2 weeks before general season and 2 weeks after general season, and they get their own thing. Sure, fine, whatever. But the idea that a muzzleloader is more primitive than a single shot shotgun, let's just break that apart a little bit. So number one, let's talk about range, okay? With the cheapest muzzleloader you can buy at Cabela's, which you can get for about $500, give or take. It's just me looking these things up quickly. Even if it was $250, whatever, it doesn't matter. You can, with some practice and reasonable expectation, have a range of between 150 and 200 yards, right? Still have knockdown power, killing power at that range, 150 to 200 yards. Okay, with one of these, with a slug, we're talking 50 yards. Maybe a little bit more, depending. I mean, there's different kinds of slugs you can buy, that have more gunpowder and, perfect aerodynamics. And so maybe you can push that 50 yards out to 60, 70 yards, maybe a little bit more. Really, that depends on a lot of things. But I'm just saying 50 as a rule of thumb, right? And if you're using a 20 gauge, you probably have to modify that. I would say 50 would be an absolute maximum, and probably a little bit inside of that with a slug. And I'm just talking about slugs here. Let's not, we might talk a little bit about buckshot as we go along here. It's another option for something like this, but different, when I'm comparing a muzzleloader to a single shot, I'm just going to be talking about slugs. And I'm only talking about a single shot here. I'm not talking about guys going out in the woods with semi-automatics and pump actions, that sort of thing. I'm talking about basically a primitive shotgun, right? The first shotguns that were around were break action, pull the hammer, bang, that sort of thing, right? The first kind, right? So in terms of range, the muzzleloader is the more sophisticated weapon. It outperforms the shotgun. Even though, things like muzzleloaders have been around for a lot longer than shotguns. Modern muzzleloaders, the ones you buy at the store, they're modern weapons. That's why they outperform something. The design of the shotgun hasn't changed. It's been about the same. The single shot shotgun, you get one that's from 100 years ago, it's about the same thing. It's pretty much the same thing. Pull the hammer, shoot, stick another bullet in, go back to business. So in that sense, I don't know how you define primitive, right? But in terms of performance, the muzzleloader is the better weapon. It outperforms the shotgun, the single shot shotgun. In terms of energy, knockdown power when it hits, again, for the same reason that the range is so much higher with the muzzleloader. And also the muzzleloader is just more accurate, right? The muzzleloader projectile is more accurate in flight. That's why you can hit things that far away. So you can expect accuracy at range to a much greater extent. It's a rifled barrel. It's got all the sort of hallmarks of a modern weapon, right? With a shotgun, we're talking smooth bore shotguns. Smooth bore with a rifled slug, right? But also in terms of energy, hitting power on impact, right? At 200 yards, you can reasonably expect your muzzleloader projectile to have about 1,000 foot-pounds of force, of energy upon impact, right? Which is generally considered to be, not just lethal, but more effective, let's put it that way, right? Once you get below 100 foot-pounds on impact, the probability of a humane kill goes down, right? You can still, if you hit something at 900 foot-pounds, it's it's still a hard hit, right? But, you know, there's a limit to these things. You know, every kind of weapon, every kind of firearm at range, you know, starts to lose energy, you know, because basically energy is used up in the flight. So with the muzzleloader, you can expect about 1,000 foot-pounds at 200 yards. With a shotgun slug, 12 gauge, you know, depending on the slug, depending on the load, all that sort of stuff, somewhere between 50 and let's say 80 yards, right? Or let's say 75 yards, give or take, right? These things are all, depends on the round, right? That's where, somewhere between 50 and 75 yards, that's when your foot-pounds gets to about 1,000, somewhere in there, right? I mean, point blank, close range, the foot-pounds of a shotgun slug are phenomenal, right? You got an ounce of lead going, you know, I don't know what the velocity is, 1,600 feet per second. That's an amazing projectile at close range, but the shotgun slug, it doesn't have the aerodynamics of a bullet, so it loses velocity as it goes through the air through wind resistance, right? Close range, you could drop a lion with a shotgun slug, but you start to really lose energy as the thing flies through the air. To sum that point up, energy-wise, in terms of the firearm's ability to, you know, reach out at range and drop something with force, the muzzleloader is the more effective weapon, right? It has more energy at range. It's got more accuracy, as we mentioned before, but it also has more energy, more hitting power at range, right? You have to get close, right? You have to actually be a pretty good hunter to take something out with a shotgun slug, because you have to be close to it, right? In that sense, the muzzleloader is more sophisticated. Well, I don't know how you define primitive, but if it outperforms, right, it's better. So the muzzleloader is better than the single shot shotgun in terms of the energy it transfers at range, right? So you have more options. Now, rate of fire. In that sense, this is more sophisticated than the muzzleloader, right? In a muzzleloader, you take a shot, bang, right? Then you gotta take the thing and put another, you know, take it down here and do all this sort of stuff, right? And, you know, put the powder in and put the wadding in and put the projectile in and put some more wadding in and put the cap in and blah, 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 right? Depending on your skill and your proficiency with a muzzleloader, that might take 30 seconds, might take a minute, might take 2 minutes, right? Depending on how good you are with all that. And of course, while you're doing all this stuff, you're trying to see where the deer is. So for all intents and purposes, with a muzzleloader, you only get one shot, you know, unless you injure the deer in a way that confuses it and it, you know, doesn't really know what, it's disoriented and having trouble getting away. But deer, like most wild animals, are pretty tough, right? If you don't hit it mortally, if you don't get a mortal wound, it's amazing how far and how quickly they can move, you know, when they're wounded. So you really don't want to, the shot placement is everything. You really, with a muzzleloader, you only get one shot. Now, with the single shot shotgun, a reload might take 5 seconds or more, right? You see the deer, bang, you know, you can maintain eye contact with the deer, and take a bullet, put it in, put it up, reacquire, and fire again, right? So it might take 5 seconds to reload the firearm. But this is academic if you've never hunted deer before, if you've never hunted anything before, if all you do is go to a range and shoot stuff, to say that the 5-second reload versus the 30-second reload is meaningful, to a large extent it reveals a lack of experience hunting. 5 seconds is an eternity, especially where I live, right? And especially with a shotgun, right? You've got a very small effective range, right? The deer has to be close. All it has to do to be safe from you is to get further away, and not much further away at all. Just a few jumps and it's out of range, out of effective range. That 5 seconds it takes you to reload, that deer's gone. If you don't hit it properly with the first shot with a single shot shotgun, it's probably over. I mean, the only situation where you might get a second shot is if the first shot stuns it really bad. You actually hit it and it's stunned and it's disoriented from the trauma of that. It's in shock. and it takes it a couple seconds to figure out what to do, because getting hit by a slug is considerable trauma, right? So you might get a second shot, but if it's that stunned and that injured from the slug, you probably don't need the second shot, right? You probably hit it properly, hit it in the chest somewhere, hit it in the vitals, right? So, really the idea that, the rate of fire means something. Sure, the single shotgun has a better rate of fire than a muzzle loader, but it's not meaningful, right? You're only going to get one shot. When you fire a firearm at a deer, when you initially fire it, it can't tell where you are because it's so loud, it's deafening, it's shocked, right? So bang, right? And let's say you miss the deer, miss it completely on the first shot. So the deer freezes. Usually they don't run when you fire, they freeze because they don't know where it came from, right? It's when you do this and put the bullet in, or the shell, and do that. When you do that, then it knows exactly where you are, right? And then it knows the way to go, which way to run, not towards you, right? Away, right? It immediately finds cover. The deer are amazing at getting away and finding cover, right? So as soon as you make that clickety click 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 of reloading and you're moving around, right? You were dead still. You were waiting for the thing to come into range. You slowly, carefully took your shot and all that sort of stuff. You missed, and you're going click, clack, click, and you're moving around. It sees you, and in that 5 seconds, it's gone. It's out of there. If you missed, it's out of there. You're not going to get a second shot. It's gone. So the fact that these have a better rate of fire than muzzleloaders, it doesn't mean anything. You only get one shot. For that matter, even firearms that have a better range of fire, like a lever action or a bolt action, the second and third shot really, ask anyone who's hunted a lot. Those second and third shots really don't mean that much. But the semi-automatic is a bit of a different category because you're not making noise when you're, putting a new round in the firearm, right? With the semi-automatic, it's just bang, 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 because the thing's, reloading with every shot. So the second and third shot might be meaningful with a semi-automatic, but with a bolt action, you're going chick, 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 right? When you're doing all of that, the thing is gone, right? And same thing with a lever action, right? And also, I guess another point is that when you're hunting something like a deer, your first shot is your best shot, right? That's when you're most in control, you're the most confident, you're the most calm, you've done all the things you've practiced, you've sort of talked yourself through the situation, right? You're sitting in a blind, the deer's getting closer and closer and closer, you're getting ready, you're controlling your breathing, you're getting everything all set up, right? And you take a shot. If you miss that shot, shot number 2 and shot number 3 are going to be made by a poorer version of yourself, right? A stressed, agitated, less confident. Oh, you missed. Was it the gun? Was it me? What did I do wrong? And then your heart rate's all up and you're more jumpy. Also, maybe you took the first shot from something resembling some kind of rest. But then with the second and third shot, the deer's moved over there somewhere. So now you're just sort of free-handing it. So now you're all over the place, right? So with the second and third shot, you're going to be way less accurate than your first shot. Your first shot's your best shot. So, regardless of what kind of hunter you are and what you're hunting for, your rate of fire is the least important part of your choice of firearm, right? It's, can you shoot accurately with that thing, right? Do you understand the range? Can you shoot accurately and hit with effective power at the range you're planning to shoot at? That's what matters, right? So the rate of fire argument really doesn't, yes, this does have a better rate of fire, but it doesn't mean anything for hunting deer. It just doesn't mean anything at all, right? So in terms of primitiveness, the only thing this has an edge in, rate of fire, doesn't mean anything. The things that are meaningful are range and hitting power and accuracy, right? And the muzzle loader has better range, better accuracy, better hitting power. Okay, so the primitive argument is preposterous. Now, the second argument about heritage and tradition and, the muzzleloader season is about that, right? Reconnecting with ancestors and that sort of thing. Number one, I don't know how ubiquitous muskets and muzzleloaders and that would have been around most people. You know, I don't know what they would have used to hunt with. You know, there would have been a period when there was bows, and then there was a period where there was firearms. How expensive these things were, you know, I would have to guess that, you know, the first period in time when it was relatively easy to get a hold of a functional firearm probably would have been when shotguns were available, right? Right, because they would have been inexpensive, they would have been versatile, they take the shells, they can do a lot of different things. I imagine most farms would have had a shotgun hanging around because you can basically do anything with a shotgun. You know, you're out, you're out walking around, you see, you know, a pheasant or a bird you can eat, you can take it. If you got some animal you got to put down, you can use it, right? Cheap, versatile weapon, single shot shotgun or double barrel shotgun. Also, if the argument is about heritage and tradition, you know, I don't know, 95% of the people hunting with muzzleloaders are not using a firearm that has anything to do with days gone by, right? They're using a modern, rifled, long-range weapon with a scope, right? So, I mean, you're using a space-age piece of technology relative to what people would have used a couple hundred years ago. Sure, after every shot, you got to do this stuff, right? You got to do the cap thing, and you got to do all that stuff, right? But in terms of range, accuracy, hitting power, you're not hunting with a musket, okay? And most of the people that are hunting during muzzleloader season are using a modern muzzleloader, and they've bought one so they can get 2 deer instead of 1, because you can get a deer during muzzleloader season, and then get a deer during rifle season, right? So it seems to me like it's just a way to get everyone to buy an extra firearm and have an extra. And that's the other thing, you have an extra firearm that you can only hunt one thing with. I mean, you're not going to go rabbit hunting with a muzzle loader. You're going to take a 22 or a 20 gauge or something like that, or maybe a 12 gauge, right? So you're buying an extra firearm to do just one thing. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So the heritage argument is ridiculous. You know, anyone using a model muzzle loader, they are not engaging in anything resembling heritage. Right? It's basically you're assembling a modern rifle bullet in a firearm, right? And you're getting modern rifle ballistics, right? So, I mean, it's just not, I don't get the heritage thing. Sure, the thing you're using looks like something people would have used a few hundred years ago, but it doesn't perform like what they would have used at all. So the heritage thing doesn't stand up. And thirdly, the ethics argument, the argument that, you know, using a muzzle loader promotes shot placement, promotes ethical hunting because you only get one shot. I don't follow that argument at all. Any kind of hunting, especially like large game hunting, deer and things like that, you only get one shot. like any hunter that goes out there thinking, well, I don't have to focus on my first shot because I can just spray the thing with, you know, spray lead into the air and eventually it'll go down. Anyone that thinks that way is not getting any deer ever. Your first shot is really the only shot you get a good chance at having success. And, you know, if you're an ethical hunter, you understand the range where your firearm is effective, where you can be effective with your firearm. You know, you know, during rifle season, I use a Swedish Mauser, 6.5 millimeter. This is an extraordinary firearm in terms of range, right? You know, probably one of the best bangs for your buck in terms of, you know, World War II surplus firearms that perform really well. But I'm not a great shot. So every deer I've ever shot with it was, you know, under 50 yards because I'm just not an amazing shot at range. I know that about myself, right? So, you know, I hunt the thick woods and, you know, I take deer when they're relatively close, between, you know, less than 50 yards. So that's, you know, it's a combination. Being an ethical hunter is more than choice of firearm. It's understanding your limitations and your preference for hunting and that sort of thing. If you want to make long distance shots, you better choose a firearm that you can make good long distance shots with. So, you know, the idea that by having a muzzle loader it promotes shot placement, I just don't follow it. For any kind of firearm, shot placement matters. And certainly if you're using a single shot shotgun with a slug in it, I don't see how that doesn't promote shot placement. Right? You're only going to get one shot, right? I mean, if you miss and you're reloading and clickety-clackety movement, the thing's gone. It's out of there. You're going to lose that deer, right? Also, for anyone that's spent time hunting deer, I mean, if you got a full-time job, you know, for us here in Nova Scotia, you can only, I mean, if you got a full-time job, it's rare that you can get it on a weeknight. You can't go out in the mornings. If you get a deer, what are you going to do? Call in sick because you got a deer? So most of us hunt on Saturday because you kind of can't hunt most Sundays. So you got like 4 Saturdays, maybe 5, you know, because it's not like every weekend you can get away. So, you know, you don't have a lot of opportunity to hunt. Usually when you see a deer, that's probably the only deer you're going to see that whole season, unless you have a lot of time and you spend a lot of time in the woods. And you're only going to get one shot, right? So, you know, anyone who's hunted a lot, or any hunter who's being taught to hunt by an experienced person, the idea of shot placement is going to be stressed heavily, especially for something like deer where there's such a huge reward, right? I mean, if you're successful in that hunt, you've got like a ridiculous amount of meat, 100 pounds of meat or something, right? So there's an importance on being successful. You're only going to get one shot. You make it count. And if you're using a single shot, you're only going to get one shot. So I don't see the muzzleloader as having any more effect on the hunter than a single shot shotgun to promoting, incentivizing good shot placement. It's really important regardless of what you use. Now, so that's basically my argument for why I think these should be allowed during muzzleloader season. Aside from the fact that I just think, and also if we're talking about heritage and tradition, here's a firearm your great-grandfather used, right? I mean, this was an old thing during the Depression when people didn't have a lot of money. They might have only had something like this, right? And I just love the idea of, you know, not having to have 10 firearms, one for this, one for that, one for this, and one for that. I'm sure there's people out there that are total gun nuts and they want to have every gun in the world. But, you know, there are people in the world that don't want to have 20 guns in their basement. Like some people just might, you know, only want to have like a couple for, you know, it's basically a versatile all-around thing that does everything. Right? If you know your terrain, you know your deer, you can get close. Right? Every deer I've ever shot has been under 50 yards, and that's with rifles, right? But you can get close. Another sort of pro of you know, allowing this, you know, allowing single shot shotguns during the muzzleloader season, because of the low cost, it might get a lot of new hunters out there. People that wouldn't have otherwise tried it might get them out giving it a try, right? Especially, or people that don't have a lot of money, right? Especially these days, a lot of people sort of being suffering economically with COVID-19, the economic effects of all of that. Another advantage is where you've got these areas where, you know, there's high deer population and not a lot of hunting pressure. We have some of those here where I live, where the location of houses and different structures and dwellings and that sort of thing are such that you can't legally use a rifle in those areas, right? So there's places where you can only use a bow, only use a crossbow, because they don't have that sort of danger range, right? So for these areas where you've got way too many deer and they're getting diseased and they're getting hit by cars and that sort of stuff, and there's basically a population problem, and no one's hunting except for bow hunters and crossbow hunters, which, by the way, if you want to get into that, it costs money, right? If you want to get a crossbow, it costs way more than a single shot shotgun, even a cheap one. That you want a crossbow that you can actually shoot a deer with, you're going to be spending way more money than single shot shotgun. And if you're going to get into bow hunting, well, you're going to have to learn how to shoot a bow and arrow. You can't just pick up a bow and arrow. I mean, you know, the reason crossbows were like, you know, all the rage back in medieval times is because teaching someone to use a bow and arrow is almost like teaching someone to be an NHL hockey player. I mean, you almost like have to be born in skates and spend years skating and years and years and years. Like, you know, these amazing archers that used war bows in warfare in medieval times, they were using a bow from childhood practically, right? It takes a long time to be effective with a bow, a lot of practice, a lot of training. Whereas, you can basically teach someone to be accurate. Between 30 and 50 yards, you can almost teach, as long as a person can see, they can be accurate with a crossbow or a shotgun or a rifle, right, fairly quickly, right? So, the idea of if the only people that can hunt in these sort of population areas where you can't use a rifle because of the location of houses and stuff like that, if the only thing that can be used is bows and crossbows, you're taking out a huge potential group of hunters that might otherwise hunt in those areas, because either they can't, like me, I'm not going to take the time to learn how to use a bow and arrow. I'd have to devote ridiculous amount of my time to be accurate with that. It's really hard to shoot a bow and arrow well. You have to invest a lot of your time. And I got other things I want to do. And I don't want to fork out the cash for a crossbow to only shoot one thing. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Especially when this is probably a better... there's people that make these preposterous arguments about crossbows outperform firearms. I can't think of one army in the world that uses crossbows. Why? Because firearms are better. Okay, it's just that simple, right? And also, this is cheaper, right? So, in some of these areas where you can only, you can't use rifles and you can't use shotguns with slugs, and you're only doing this sort of close range hunting, you could have people using buckshot, right? And like double-aught 12 gauge buckshot, that's a 33 caliber ball, right? And at close range, 25 yards sort of thing, that's devastating, right? There's lots of people that say buckshot cripples, but they really don't understand much about the ballistics of buckshot. If you take time to pattern your firearm, and you can get the pattern, if you know what range the pattern basically makes, like a pizza pattern, like think of a pizza, right? Like a 12-inch, 15-inch pizza. Right? If you know what range your buckshot makes that pattern, and you point that at the vitals of a deer, right? And that range is going to be somewhere between 25 and 35 yards, give or take, right? Once you get out to 50 yards, the buckshot spreads out a lot, right? So you got to be close to be effective with buckshot. But at that range, a 33 caliber ball is going to, it's lethal, especially when you consider the deer's being hit by more than one, right? So they get shot in the liver and the lungs and the heart and the throat, right? They're just going down, right? So if you've got these areas where you've got these sort of out of control deer populations that's causing all kinds of problems, and you want people in there sorting it out, maybe allow guys that don't have a lot of money that want to put 2 deer in their fridge to use their 12 gauge shotgun in there, and maybe that'll help with that. One final note about shotgun hunting: be worth your while, and this even stands if you're going to be using a shotgun with a slug, but a slug or buckshot. If you want to use a 12 gauge for that, I would go to a range. Here in Nova Scotia, we have public ranges. I would go to a range and fire a single shot shotgun with that ammunition to get a sense of if you're equal to the recoil, right? Single shotguns they're relatively light. Like, they don't have a lot of metal and wood. The mass of the firearm is relatively low, which means that when you fire a powerful, right, there's way more gunpowder in a slug or buckshot than in birdshot. Right? You can tell that by the way the shell's put together. The recoil is phenomenal, and you don't want to find out the hard way that you're a flinchy person, which I am. Right? There's the reason my rifle is a 6.5 millimeter Swedish Mauser. I tried a Lee Enfield. I tried I had a Muzzle Nagant for a while. Those things kick, and I just, in working with these things at the range, I'm just not effective with things that kick like that. For me, the 6.5 millimeter or the 270, those sort of slightly smaller caliber rifles have less recoil, and I can consistently shoot accurately with them. You might find that when you try to shoot slugs at a range with a shotgun, a single shot 12 gauge, that the recoil is so powerful that you get flinchy. You just tense up when you're about to pull the trigger, and you can't hit the broadside of a barn with it because you're so scared of the recoil. And you can put a recoil pad and you can do all kinds of different things. But some people are just flinchy. I think I'm one of those kinds of people. So for me, like, I'm much more accurate with a 16 gauge, even more accurate with a 20 gauge. But that's something, you know, that you work that out at the range and figure that sort of thing out. So with a 20 gauge, I don't have the options I would have with a 12 gauge in terms of range, because it does not carry the same hitting power at range as a 12 gauge slug. Right? Instead of an ounce, you got 5/8 of an ounce of the lead, and not as much gunpowder. Right? So with a 20 gauge, you're going to have to be inside of 50 yards to be confident that the projectile has a hitting power to put it down. Right? You want to get as close as you can, almost like you're bow hunting. So you're kind of working with bow hunting range. Of course, when you hit the thing, it's going to do way more damage than a bow arrow. I know lots of people argue that, you know, bow has this power or that power. A bow arrow does not hit anything with 2,000 foot-pounds of energy. You have any sense of what that kind of foot-pounds, what that means? The kind of energy that's being transferred, the physics of that. Sure, an arrow can mess something up. It can make a devastating mess of an internal organ. But the energy that's being transferred by a slug going 1,500 feet per second that weighs 5/8 of an ounce is phenomenal. Right? If you had to choose which thing to be shot with, I think I'd pick the arrow, thank you. So anyway, that's probably another video on another topic in and of itself. The whole point is that if for whatever reason listening to this video, you said, yeah, maybe I'm going to try using a shotgun in one of these areas where the distances are such that you have to have a shotgun. I would take that thing out and try it a bit before you bank your whole deer season on it, because the recoil of a single shot 12 gauge when you're firing a slug or buckshot is spectacular. It's a cannon. I mean, it is a cannon. The reason these things are measured in gauges is it's a hangover from the way cannonballs, right? Cannonballs were different pounds, this many pounds, that many pounds, and gauge is basically a function of a pound. I don't want to get into the mathematics of it, but it's like the number of balls it takes to make a pound of the diameter of the barrel. So basically, a shotgun is a hand cannon. Right? And once you get into 12 gauge, you start to understand why it might be called a hand cannon, because when you're firing those high velocity things like slugs, SSG, buckshot, the recoil is spectacular. So you might want to just either try it out, see how it feels, see if you're equal to that kind of recoil, and if not, think about maybe getting a 16 gauge or a 20 gauge and learning what range that can be effective at, right? And knowing what range your pattern works and that sort of stuff. That's all the important stuff. I mean, people are going to make arguments about buckshot and crippling and all sort of stuff. If you're using it responsibly and you understand your range where you can have an effective pattern, it's just a devastating weapon when it's done right. Any firearm can cripple if it's not being used right. And a muzzleloader, if you're trying to make a 200-yard, if I tried to make a 200-yard shot with a muzzleloader, being a guy who can't make long shots, I would either miss or probably cripple, right? It wouldn't be ethical for me, even though a muzzleloader can make 200-yard shots. It will not be ethical for me to make a 200-yard shot with a muzzleloader, because I'm a terrible shot. I should be making 50-yard shots with a muzzleloader. That's a shot I can make with, reasonable, pie plate accuracy, as they say. If I aim for the heart, I'm going to hit something important, right? It's going to go down. Every deer I've ever shot has dropped right where I shot it, or taken a few steps and dropped, because they've all been close range, and I've aimed at the heart. So that's my way of performing ethics. And if I use a shotgun with a slug, I'm going to have an ounce of lead going at that thing, relatively close range. It's going down. Anyway, just a few thoughts on that. The idea that break action shotguns, I don't know how you'd get any of these rules changed, but I mean, my main problem is that I don't understand the rule, given that this isn't really that much different from a muzzleloader in terms of what it can do. And in fact, it's actually like more primitive in a lot of ways, insofar as it is outperformed by a muzzleloader. I guess to that effect, there are these little kits. There's the thing you can put in here and put a cap in, close her up, and just treat it like a muzzleloader. There is an adapter, basically like a muzzleloader adapter you can buy for 12 gauge shotguns that allows you to use the 12 gauge just like a muzzleloader. So I don't know how the law treats that. In reading the regulations, I don't see anything specific to it. It may say that it's a vehicle that, you know, it has to be a firearm that can only be loaded through the barrel, right? And this one here, obviously, it's got another option, right? But maybe that's a gray area. Maybe that's a place where the rules can be changed. But again, even that seems preposterous to me, because why should I have to buy a $70 thing to stick in here and then all this other muzzle loading gear? Why should I have to do that? If in the end I'm just going to kill a deer with a hunk of lead, why don't I just use this thing as is, right? I don't have any real advantage. By bringing this out into the woods, I do not have an advantage over a muzzleloader hunter. I guess that's the main point I'm trying to make. I have to be closer. I have to be quieter, right? I have to understand the quarry. I have to understand my range. The muzzleloader hunter has an advantage over me. And the rate of fire that this has, which is better than the rate of fire, doesn't mean anything because they're only getting one shot anyway. So I don't see why, you know, you couldn't have something like this during muzzleloader season. It would certainly give a lot of help to people that don't have the money to get these second firearms, you know, to use for like 1 month of the year, right? And it'd allow a person to get 2 deer, right? Or maybe they should change the rules and you can only have 1 deer. I wonder how many people would buy muzzleloaders if the deer you shot during muzzleloader season was the only deer you could get. I wonder about that. But anyway, just a few thoughts. Please let me know what you're thinking in the comments. This is a relatively contentious issue among hunters. Of course, people that have invested in crossbows and bows and muzzleloaders don't want yahoos walking around the woods with shotguns during their special season. And there's people like me that say, why should I have to buy another firearm to go shoot a hunk of lead at a deer a month before the regular season? I mean, if the whole idea of that special season is it's a season where it's harder to get deer, it's harder with this than with a muzzleloader because I have to get closer. Hope you found that interesting. If you did, please like, share, subscribe. Until next time, enjoy the outdoors on the cheap. Thanks for watching.